Norway Chess has started. It's a classical event, a classical over-the-board tournament, no less. That's great to see. And a very interesting lineup of players. We have Alireza Firouzja, the 18-year-old who now from Iran but now represents France. We have Ariane Tari, Norwegian prospect. We have Richard Rapport, I think one of the most creative players in from the elite. We have Sergei Karyakin. Well, we know his credentials, world title challenger. And we have Yan Nepomniachtchi from Russia, who will be challenging for the title in November. And the world champion himself, Magnus Carlsen. Now, it's a double round robin. So 10 players, 6 players. So therefore 10 rounds. First round today. And Alireza Firouzja played Carlsen. Their classical game was drawn. Quite an interesting game, actually. But, well, they held each other off, basically. So if games are drawn, then they play an Armageddon game. And that's the game that I want to show you. So Firouzja with the white pieces. So I think he starts with 5 minutes and Carlsen with 4 minutes. Player with the black pieces 4 minutes. But if you're playing black, then you get draw odds. Firouzja plays bishop b5, the Rossolimo, and well, this is an opening that I really like playing with white. And well, the two main moves are g6 and e6. Carlsen goes for e6 as he played in the classical game. I'll show you where that game varied in a second. e6. Well, Carlsen's had great success with this move, actually. You might remember an extraordinary game from Zagreb 2019 where Carlsen destroyed Anish Giri in like 23 moves, I think it was, playing this system with black. But Firouzja plays a one of the sort of recommended ways to play with rook e1, and Carlsen himself has played like this in the past. Now, in their classical game, just before this, Carlsen played knight g6, and it was clear that Firouzja was well prepared for this. He came up with this move h4, very interesting move actually. Carlsen managed to negotiate his way through pretty well, but probably Firouzja should have been better out of the opening. Anyway, rook e1. Now, instead of this knight g6 move, Carlsen was the first to vary. He played b6. So it just wants to shake it up a bit. d4. So now we go back into a kind of strange open Sicilian. It sort of looks like a Taimanov, but with this very early fianchetto. And the bishop came all the way back to f1. We don't want to give up our two bishops, not in this position. And Carlsen exchanged and brought the knight to c6. Queen came to e3. And I think Carlsen should already be pretty comfortable here. I think probably queen c7 might be a nice move to stop white's queen coming to g3. But I can sort of understand why Carlsen didn't want to do this, because that kind of move is in the air. It's probably not very good, but in a blitz game, you just don't want to even think about that possibility. So Carlsen, after quite a long think actually, over a minute and a half, which is a lot of time to consume, played bishop c5. And in some ways that's typical of him. He likes forcing continuations. He likes to take control in a game. And here, I think white could develop just bishop h6 or bishop f4, bishop e3. And I think white is slightly better there. Bishop out, the rook comes to d1. Feels more comfortable for white. But Firouzja played in a very forcing way as well, and suddenly this is a critical position, because if white gets time for knight e4 and bishop g5, bishop h6, or some piece into f6, well, white could be winning straight away. So it's imperative that black hits out here. So f5. And now black has counterplay, because suddenly there's a threat here. And the rook could possibly switch to g6 as well. Don't forget that bishop is on b7. Now I realise, of course, there's a bishop on this position. There's a bishop on f1, protecting g2. Nevertheless, you know, black has pretty serious counterplay here. But, of course, this is the priority, f2 at the moment. And Firouzja burned some time in calculating this move, bishop g5. And here is where it all kicks off. Carlsen had obviously anticipated this. Rook takes pawn. Okay, so that gives the queen. But now black, Carlsen gets the queen back. But he's giving up material here. Rook takes queen. And here, you know, you can take the rook. Black would have a bishop and pawn against a rook, but also very nice centre pawns. I mean, black certainly has decent compensation for the exchange there. I mean, it's a very small material investment. But Firouzja got greedy. He took on b6 and then took on g3, so he swiped an extra pawn. So it's just a bishop against a rook and no extra pawn for black. But that was probably a mistake for Firouzja to play like this. Carlsen could play rook f8. It's a very simple idea. The rook wants to transfer to either the 6th or 5th rank and swing over to the h-file. And yes, folks, that is checkmate. That kind of tunnel checkmate on the h-file. It's a serious threat. And actually, in combination with black's minor pieces here, this is very nice for black. So, for example, okay, so knight into d4, threatens c2, opens up this bishop to the knight. The rook can still swing across. Black has, I think, superb compensation there. But curiously, Carlsen just went to swipe this pawn here. Now, you know, they're both already really short of time, but I was so surprised that Carlsen went for this. For me, it's not typical of his style. You know, he usually prefers activity to grabbing material, and well, if he'd had a couple more seconds to reflect, I'm sure he would have gone for the other continuation. But remember, Carlsen just needs a draw here to get extra points, or an extra half point. We'll go into that in a second. So now after knight e4, white starts to coordinate, and black has to waste time. The bishop comes back. Knight c5 is very unsettling for black. Bishop c8 has to go backwards. c3 shuts out this bishop. That's nice. So there are no longer threats to white's king. This pawn chain, these pawns are secure. The bishops had to go back. Okay, Carlsen fights back. He's pushing the knight back and brings the king over to protect those centre pawns. That's very important. Nevertheless, white is so well coordinated here. g3 is an excellent move to put the bishop on the long diagonal. So that's more pressure here for Carlsen. This is quite an unpleasant position. So d5, but now the knight comes in. b4 maintains the knight on this excellent square, looking at key squares in the position, but also tricky move with the king in the middle. If that pawn swiped, then knight e4 check. There's a pin there and a fork. Or if the bishop goes the other way, bishop takes pawn, then another nasty knight fork. Really good. So Carlsen's struggling here. He went for activity by advancing the a pawn to give his rook access to the open file, but this is still extremely difficult for black, and Firouzja took the initiative. If the knight goes back to d8, then knight c5 looks very dangerous. There's also knight g5 as well. So Carlsen took on e4, rook takes, but basically white recovers the piece now. And rook c4. So once again, a pin here. Carlsen swiped the c-pawn. And you could take the knight back immediately. I think, that looks like a pretty good winning chance for white. But Firouzja played rook c1. And, I mean, they were just down to, under a minute. They were just blitzing like crazy. Remember, Firouzja with white in a must-win situation in the Armageddon. And here Carlsen could have just taken on b5. But probably he missed this little Zwischenschach. So the king has to move and then you take this so the bishop is no longer en prise on c8. And, well, black still has some work to do here, but it should be a draw, basically. But instead, Carlsen played e5, and now he is lost. King g1. Good move, getting the king off the light square here. And now, bishop here. Now it's impossible to take because of rook b3, pin and win. So g6 from Carlsen. Now the king comes up. h5, rook a3. So this forces the issue because there's going to be this check. Still, knight takes pawn is met by rook b3. g5, rook check. And the rook sweeps across the board. So Firouzja just mopping up now, basically. Or at least he should be. g4, that's an important move, keeping another pawn on the board, keeping as many pawns on the board. But basically with these pieces stuck on the other side of the board, it's not going to take too much for white to win this. But Carlsen is a fighter. He's still working hard. I mean, maybe the easiest way to win this is just to exchange bishops. One could just trade here. Now be careful. You don't want to take and allow a knight fork. But if the king just steps around here, king in here, rook takes g5, you're going to pick up this pawn. It's actually very, very simple. So that would have reduced material, but maybe by this stage, Firouzja just had very little time on the clock, basically. It was a question of whether he could, well, win in the time allowed. And here again, bishop d5, exchanging bishops is the way to go. But in fact, Firouzja lost the plot completely and allowed this pawn through. And so now, of course, it's just a draw. And here, well, Firouzja ran out of time. So that meant that because this game was drawn, well, in fact, Carlsen wins because Firouzja ran out of time. But okay, under normal circumstances, this would be a draw. So that meant that Carlsen won the Armageddon. I hope you're following this. Carlsen won the Armageddon. So that meant that he got 1.5 points from this round one. Firouzja got 1 point because he drew the classical game. In the other game, Tari against Rapport won that, so he got 3 points. He won it in the classical, so you get 3 points. I hope that's reasonably clear. I made a hash of explaining that, but anyway, it was an entertaining day. In the other game, Karyakin against Nepo. Nepo had visa problems, so he's arrived late. I think it was Nepo. So that game has been postponed to the free day. Any questions? Probably loads of questions after my bumbling explanation, but anyway, it was pretty entertaining. There'll be more coming from Norway Chess pretty soon. Thanks for watching.